Okay, we're good. Yay, there's Margaret. Did you get that link I sent you, Margaret?
You know what? I signed up again, so I have 3 different usernames now. I just wanted to make sure I was on time, but I'll figure it out. Poor Michael, he'll probably walk me through it.
Okay, well, I'm glad you made it in.
Yeah, thank you guys.
You bet.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Stone.
Hey, Margaret, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you guys?
Good, good.
Good. I'm glad you're in the class, Andrew.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna be here.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work. I'm gonna have to study this weekend to catch up.
It really is a lot. I gotta catch up. I guess I don't know how many days I missed. I think just one day.
I think you and I both missed Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday I was kind of confused and having problems getting logged in, so I missed Tuesday.
Yeah.
But I got it now. You see, I'm here on time.
Yep, you are. That's great. Right. Everybody's here. Melissa, we can't hear you for some reason. I think you were talking to us. There you are.
Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes I turn my sound down. It's so strange because in the morning, you can't probably see it on the camera, but this is where my mic is. And so what I end up doing is this. It's horrible. I mean, it's so awesome that Michael had already put the videos up in Canvas, so they're YouTube videos. But then all I can hear me is saying a couple words, and then it's like it sounds like I've been running the whole time I'm trying to do this. So I'm gonna try not to keep this so darn close. But let's see. Oh, and there's Miss Blue. The only color I can say in Spanish without murdering it is azul. So let's see. I have a list of folks before we get diving into this. Matthew.
Hello, hello.
Yay. There's another gal that signed up, but I believe she's going to just get into Canvas. So her name is Cherish Cole. So I don't know if you're familiar with her, Margaret, but it'll be a good thing. So since everybody's here, we'll get started. All your speakers are on.
Yep.
Excellent. So let me go ahead and do my share of my screen. Oops. Move this out of the way. Here we go. It's interesting because here we are, we're on day 3 and we're on chapter 4 and 5. But that first couple chapters, it's kind of like a refresher for you all, because again, there's a lot of information that not everybody gets when they're in school. So that's why you have that basic chemistry aspect of it. There's some basic math. And then anything that I feel like needs to be added to this particular book, that's what I kind of try to put into Canvas for you. So there's clips there, as I mentioned in some of the other classes this week. And you might not have heard, because I think I'm told only Stone Monday. But when you go through this AWWA book, you're going to notice every once in a while it makes a reference to like a watch this video. And those video links I embedded into Canvas, so that way you can see them. And then the videos that I'm going to show you are the long versions. So those are the paid videos. And so as long as we keep some of this stuff, oops, sorry. As long as we keep this stuff private under like the copyright, we should be okay. Because I know that all the courses are going to be videoed. So just these longer videos, they're copyrighted through AWWA. So that's my little disclaimer for today. But what we're going to be covering here Thursday is water sources. And then it kind of goes into some of the treatment options, but it's pretty slim. And then in the next chapter, chapter 5, it goes into groundwater quality and wells, which is interesting because typically your wells are part of the distribution system. But it's kind of interesting because some of the information in chapter 5 talks about how they actually drill wells. And then I also put more information about drilling in the actual Canvas class itself. So today I'm going to inundate you with 2 videos. The first one is going to be talking about the source of water and water source protection, basically. And then the other one is going to go into the wells. So this is our book, and I'm so excited. Everybody has it. USET does such a fabulous job getting all this mailed out to everybody. So the first thing in chapter 4, it's on page 103, and it's going to go into more detail about the water cycle. And then in the book, it does give you the definitions. So there are certain definitions that you need to be aware of. So here I even listed them. So we talk about evaporation because especially in certain states, like where we are, we're in arid states. So when it comes to our source water, evaporation is very crucial because our watersheds are our lakes. So we watch to see during months like this and this last summer, we haven't received much rain. So we're watching that evaporation rate because now we're losing the water that's going to be coming to California, Arizona, Nevada. And then there's transpiration. And of course, as you see here, this happens with vegetation and plants. So that's another interesting thing because here we have all these natural disasters that are going along throughout the United States. And we need and we rely on those plants in order to basically transpire. And it's kind of cool. This is a little bit off the subject, but if you ever have a chance, uh, Google Israel because they came up with a way to capture the transpiration from different types of vegetation and actually from the atmosphere itself. And it's pretty cool because it's for areas where they really lack water. And then, of course, it talks about condensation, there's precipitation, and then when we get into the wells, we have to rely on infiltration and also percolation because those two, not only is it important for our aquifer, but we have to look at also pollution because during percolation, it's typically in that first layer of earth. That's why if you ever heard of folks having septic tanks, they'll do what's called a perk test because they want to see if those leach fields, once the septic comes out of those tanks, how quickly it's going to pass through the natural filtration of the earth and then get into the aquifer. So infiltration and percolation. And it's cute because kids learn this stuff already. And if you ever go to YouTube, there's some cute little rap songs about the whole water cycle. So if you were to put this into a giant statement, and I'm not going to read this to you, nor do I expect you, you can imagine with the water cycle, we're dependent on the rain. The rain gives us runoff. The runoff is going to feed our reservoirs, and hopefully we're going to have infiltration. And then whatever the water is passing across or through, it's going to change the quality of that water because there's going to be physical, chemical, and biological effects to that water. Another interesting issue that's arising, especially in our state, because of the lack of water, and I might have already mentioned this, is the water rights. And we've been kind of watching the mail ourselves because we have a well, but luckily our well isn't fed by a nearby stream. So folks that have water rights to surface water, and now that there's been no rain and we're getting into drought conditions, again, they can enforce laws that state that groundwater under the influence of surface water, people can't use their wells. So that's pretty scary. So another thing that you're going to see in these books, it does talk about the different types of aquifers. And it's really interesting, especially depending, I guess, where your water source actually is. because this is about how the ground is actually laid out. So you can see here there's what's called unconfined aquifers, and basically it's areas that water can move versus other areas where aquifers can be combined or confined, I should say. And then there's artesian aquifers, and those are typically under slates of rock, and the pressure allows that water to actually come out on its own. And then there's areas where it's fractured, and to me, the fractured aquifers, they're kind of like if you had a bathtub and there was a crack in it. So once you fill up that tub, unfortunately, that water's going to drain out eventually. When I lived in another portion of our state, we had a fractured aquifer. So infiltration was dependent on snow and any type of rain, because that aquifer, that water was constantly draining out. So those are some of the things that we look at. We're going to come back to this picture here because there's really a lot of information on here. When we dig into the quality of water, we'll talk about, for instance, like the lateral area of influence and these different types of zones of saturation. So in the book, it does talk about groundwater quite a bit. And depending upon where you are and the makeup of the earth is going to cause changes in what type of aquifer you have. So like back east, it's pretty cool, especially like in Tennessee, where they have areas of lime rock, because the aquifers, once the water leaves it, it leaves like those caves. And you might have heard of different types of caves. They have these types in Mexico as well. They call it like cenotes, where you can actually go down into the aquifers themselves. But it's interesting because of this limestone. I'm not into like any types of debates when it comes to environmental issues. But one thing that I have heard, when you have areas where they're fracking, what they're doing is they're taking out one source, which is basically the oil, and then they replace it with water. But I think what's happening is when you put that water back, water is a universal solvent. So depending upon the earth, like if it is such as a limestone, once it dissolves in the water, that's when you get that land subsidence. And I think when they were doing fracking in certain areas where people were having earthquakes, like in Oklahoma, for instance, those were fracking issues. So that's why we have to be careful of what type of ground we have. And not only that, but when they drill wells, they have to look at the makeup of the earth, because Monday, when we went over the periodic table, there are certain elements that are MCLs. Basically, they cause cancer, like arsenic. You know, there's high levels of fluorine. All of that's in the earth. So they'll look at things such as that. And then it talks about the media as well, because you're going to see when I show you some videos when they actually drill a well and where you have casing, they have to protect the casing and the well assembly itself. So they'll look at how porous the media is. If there's any type of cracks, is anything going to cause it to cave in? Are we going to be dealing with sand or gravel? And then some materials tend to be not permeable. So clay is one of those. And it's kind of interesting because some of you that have actually work in distribution, the analysis that we do for trenching and excavation, we're looking to see what the earth is going to do, if it's going to cave in. Same thing with wells. They have to look at that type of material to see how it's going to respond. And with clay, we have a lot of clay here in Arizona. And what it does, when it gets wet, it expands. But unfortunately, when it's dry, like it is right now, it does the opposite. It extracts, so it shrinks, and that can cause issues as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the video on source water, and it's going to hit some of the information that is in chapter 4. And you're going to see, like, for instance, in your book on page 106, when it talks about those different types of aquifers and then with runoff and some of that good stuff. So let me stop sharing this. Oh, I had my video on the whole time. I'm going to turn that off. And let me share my screen. Got my sound on. Let me mute myself.
Supplying water to the public is one of the most important services offered in society. Civilizations cannot grow or flourish without abundant and safe water supply. Knowing where to obtain and how to protect sources of drinking water remains a paramount issue now and for the future. This program will cover the subject in 2 parts. First, water sources and resources. Secondly, regulations that have been enacted to protect source water and how utilities and their supporting communities can become more proactive in source water protection. The development of watershed and aquifer recharge land potentially contributes to the contamination of source water. With that comes increased treatment costs, costs that can be avoided or reduced by greater emphasis on source protection. A study of 27 water suppliers conducted by the Trust for Public Land and the American Water Works Association found that an increase of forest cover in a watershed is generally related to the lowering of treatment costs. Other studies have shown the cost of treating contaminated water to be many times more expensive than preventing the contamination. Whether the water utility relies on surface water, groundwater, or both, protecting that source is critically important and generally more cost-effective than treating a contaminated source. Water is a limited resource. Less than 1% of all the water on Earth is accessible and technologically or economically feasible to use for drinking water supplies. When a water source becomes contaminated, it may be difficult or expensive to develop an alternative source. Source water protection programs can help mitigate the likelihood and the health and financial impacts of contamination events. To start, one needs to understand the origins of water sources, overland and subsurface flow conditions, and the locations and types of potential contaminants that could impact water quality. The United States Geological Survey reports that as of 2010, approximately 42 billion gallons of water per day is withdrawn for public supply. Approximately 63% of that supply comes from surface water sources. Surface water sources include streams, lakes, reservoirs, and groundwater under the direct influence of surface water, such as a pumping well located next to a river. Surface water sources are vulnerable to contamination from direct discharges from upstream facilities, watershed runoff from urban and agricultural areas, and groundwater inflow. Contaminants are sometimes directly discharged into rivers or streams, influencing downstream water supply intakes. Runoff events can also introduce contaminants into drinking water sources, either directly or by contributing to upstream tributaries. Runoff is precipitation that doesn't infiltrate soil and thus flows overland during rain events or snowmelt, emptying into rivers and streams that feed lakes and reservoirs and ultimately oceans. In the U.S., nearly 75% of community water systems, mostly small systems, rely primarily on groundwater that is pumped to the surface. Groundwater is water contained in the open spaces between soil and rock particles located below the water table in an unconfined aquifer or under pressure in a confined aquifer. An aquifer is a geologic formation, group of formations, or part of a formation that is saturated and sufficiently permeable to transmit sufficient quantities of water to wells and springs. Recharge may occur locally or from a great distance away, depending on the landscape and aquifer conditions. It is important to consider what areas contribute to recharge because conditions in these areas can affect both water availability and water quality of the aquifer. In a confined aquifer, layers of impermeable rock restrict the movement of contaminants infiltrating from the land surface into the aquifer, protecting it from many contaminants. In an unconfined aquifer, there is no continuous overlying layer of impermeable rock or clay. Water can infiltrate directly from the surface into the aquifer, potentially carrying contaminants. The amount of contaminants that can be filtered as aquifers are replenished depends on how water moves through the soil and rock. This is a function of the porosity and permeability of the geological materials that the water is traveling through. Groundwater supplies can also be contaminated from the defective or improperly designed injection wells and septic systems that introduce pollutants directly into the aquifer. The area from which groundwater enters a well to be withdrawn at the surface is called the zone of contribution. The size of this zone can vary based on aquifer conditions as well as the rate of pumping. Wellhead protection involves managing activities within the contribution and recharge area that might affect groundwater used for drinking water supply. The land area from which water enters a water body, such as a river or lake, is called a watershed. Watersheds are made up of all the water bodies, land use and land cover, and organisms within the watershed. All of the precipitation that falls within a watershed eventually finds its way to the lowest point of the watershed. Smaller watersheds may flow and combine into a larger watershed. An illustration would be the many tributary streams and rivers that eventually flow into the Mississippi River. Source water protection is the first important step in a multiple barrier approach to safeguarding drinking water and protecting public health. Protected watersheds also increase the infiltration of water into soil and recharge to groundwater aquifers, lowering the potential for flooding and erosion and increasing groundwater reserves. Forest fires, flooding, erosion, and landslides can impact water quality. So do human-initiated activities like mining, industry, logging, agriculture, and commercial and residential development. Impacts to source water quality may be point source or non-point source in origin. Non-point source pollution occurs when surface runoff moves across or into the ground, picking up pollutants along the way and carrying them into the surface water or groundwater supply. Non-point source pollution isn't generally attributable to a single factor, but is the total sum of diffused and widespread surface contamination within the watershed. Some examples of non-point source pollution would include stormwater runoff, fertilizer and pesticide runoff from farm fields, and sediment erosion from ground-disturbing activities such as logging and construction. Point source pollution comes from a distinct, identifiable source, such as a solid waste landfill, leaking underground or above-ground storage tank, or wastewater discharge from an industrial facility or sewage treatment plant. Point source pollution has traditionally been referred to as coming from a pipe, but may also be the result of a spill or discharge from a specific site or location. Another example of a significant point source of pollution is confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. In the U.S., estimates indicate that the quantity of animal waste generated is 13 times greater than human sanitary waste. Obviously, all of that animal waste is being disposed of somewhere and can ultimately end up in raw surface water supplies. Animal waste that finds its way into source water is of particular concern because it may contain pathogens such as Cryptosporidium, Giardia, E. coli, and Salmonella. These can cause serious gastrointestinal illnesses and even death in humans with weakened immune systems. Animal waste can also contain nutrients that promote growth of potentially undesirable algae and other nuisance plants. With greater control of point sources through regulatory programs, the EPA says that non-point sources of pollution are now the leading cause of water pollution, but are diffuse and difficult to quantify. Here's one example of how non-point source pollution occurs. In an urban area, oil, gasoline, and automotive fluids drip from vehicles onto roads and parking lots. These combine with pesticides and fertilizers used by homeowners, businesses, and municipalities on their lawns and public areas such as parks and golf courses, as well as pet and wildlife waste left on the ground surface. Developed areas covered by cement sidewalks, asphalt roads, buildings with shingled roofs and paved parking lots are all impervious surfaces that prevent the direct infiltration of water into the underlying soils when it rains. Instead of being retained on site, these accumulated pollutants are rapidly transported by runoff into storm drains. The storm drains carry the pollutants directly to rivers and lakes, which contributes to the degradation of the water bodies. In addition, many other non-point sources can also contribute to water quality problems. These include poorly designed or improperly functioning homeowners' septic or city sewer systems, car washes, dry cleaners, repair shops, laboratories, medical facilities, and beauty shops. These types of facilities can use and store chemicals and hazardous materials that could find their way into a community's drainage system, which ultimately feeds the receiving water body. A proactive step to addressing pollution is to determine the exact boundaries and features of the local source water protection area and identify the possible contaminant sources within this area. One technology that has improved water source protection is the use of Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. GIS integrates information into one watershed map that can become a shared resource and guide for remediation or protection. Even for small communities with limited resources, GIS can help them in understanding threats to their water supplies and developing strategies for source water protection. Identifying and understanding the threats to source waters is an important step in developing effective mitigation and protection strategies. A number of communities have recognized that the easiest way to protect source water is to own as much of the source water protection area as possible. This gives drinking water providers more control over potential pollution sources. Controlling the area is unfortunately not always practical or economically feasible with shifting population demographics and new commercial and residential development. If water providers can't purchase or control the lands in their source water protection areas, they're faced with trying to influence and engage other stakeholders in source water protection activities. This can be accomplished through non-regulatory and regulatory approaches. Non-regulatory efforts typically involve collaboration, education, and cost sharing. Regulatory approaches can include local zoning and land use ordinance, as well as state and federal regulations for land and water management. The Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899 is the oldest federal environmental law in the United States. The Act makes it a crime to discharge refuse matter of any kind into the navigable U.S. waters or tributaries without a permit. The Rivers and Harbors Act also made it illegal to dam navigable streams without a license or permit from Congress. The 1948 Federal Water Pollution Control Act, which would later become what we know now as the Clean Water Act, originally only regulated point source or end-of-pipe discharges of pollutants into surface waters, for example, lakes and rivers. The Act also defined waters of the United States. U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers manage the Clean Water Act's Section 404 permitting program, which defines exactly which waters are subject to Clean Water Act jurisdiction based on the Waters of the U.S. definition. This is often in dispute and requires further clarification that is ultimately adjudicated by the U.S. Supreme Court. The Clean Water Act of 1972 is truly the cornerstone of water quality legislation in the United States. The Clean Water Act prohibits the discharge of certain materials into the water and actually is a combination of federal water pollution control policies over many years. The primary objective of the Clean Water Act was to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters, to essentially make all of the waters of the U.S. fishable and swimmable. It established a control program for ensuring that communities have clean water by regulating the release of contaminants into the country's waterways. Later added to the Clean Water Act was the Impaired Waters Total Maximum Daily Loads, or TMDL program, which aims to address both point and non-point sources of pollution to surface waters to meet water quality standards. These are standards that describe the desired condition of a water body to support designated uses such as ecological protection, recreation, drinking water, and other purposes. Water quality standards form a legal basis for controlling pollution entering water bodies and can be numeric, as in a maximum concentration level, or descriptive, as in free from certain negative conditions. The EPA website states, a TMDL is a pollution budget and includes a calculation of the maximum amount of a pollutant that can occur in a water body while maintaining designated uses of the water body. The TMDL allocates the necessary reductions to one or more pollutant sources. A TMDL serves as a planning tool and potential starting point for restoration or protection activities with the ultimate goal of attaining or maintaining water quality standards. Under Section 303D of the Clean Water Act, states, territories, and authorized tribes, included in the term state here, are required to submit lists of impaired waters. These are waters that are too polluted or otherwise degraded to meet water quality standards. The law requires that the states establish priority rankings for waters on the lists and develop total maximum daily loads for these waters. Section 319H of the Clean Water Act also provides for implementation of non-point source pollution management programs through federal grant funding for states, territories, and tribes. In the United States, the Safe Drinking Water Act, SDWA, administered by the U.S. EPA, was first passed in 1974 and expanded and strengthened in 1986 and 1996 to protect the quality of drinking water. Mary Tiemann, a specialist in environmental policy who authored Safe Drinking Water Act, a summary of the Act and its major requirements, offered this summation. A key component of SDWA is the requirement that the EPA promulgates national primary drinking water regulations for contaminants that may pose health risks and are likely to be present in public water supplies. Section 1412 instructs the EPA on how to select contaminants for regulation and specifies how the EPA must establish regulations once a contaminant has been selected. The regulations apply to the roughly 168,000 privately and publicly owned water systems that provide piped water for human consumption to at least 15 service connections or that regularly serve at least 25 people. The EPA has issued regulations for more than 90 contaminants, including regulations setting new standards for drinking water disinfectants and their byproducts and for microbial contaminants, a regulation establishing a standard for uranium in drinking water, and a regulation revising the standard for arsenic. The SDWA establishes health-based limits on foreign matter in water, limiting certain man-made chemicals and disease-causing microbial contaminants to water additives such as fluoride and chlorine. The SDWA also establishes specific maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, for specific contaminants and the requirement to monitor them. The federal government sets water quality guidelines and regulates federal facilities. The states generally are responsible for implementing SDWA requirements and regulating the provision of safe drinking water to the public. Drinking water is usually treated and distributed at the local level. State and local governments may elect to establish and enforce requirements beyond the SDWA if they see them as beneficial. In Canada, drinking water is the shared responsibility of provincial, territorial, federal, and municipal governments. The federal agency Health Canada uses its scientific and technical expertise to develop guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality in partnership with the provinces and territories. These guidelines are used by every jurisdiction in Canada and are the basis for establishing drinking water quality requirements for all Canadians. In the U.S., the 1986 SDWA amendment established the Wellhead Protection Program. States were directed to develop a program tailored to specific physical, cultural, and administrative conditions of an area to protect groundwater based on water systems. Water providers have identified the boundaries of wellhead protection zones and the sources of contamination in those areas. The program also includes management practices designed to protect wells from those sources of contamination. In 1996, a new amendment to SDWA renewed the focus on source water protection as a tool to prevent the contamination of water supplies. Instead of relying solely on water treatment, additional emphasis is placed on contamination prevention and management of source water protection areas. States are responsible for preparing source water assessments for all their public water systems in order to identify and prioritize threats and quantify susceptibilities. Source water assessments contain 4 components. The first component is identification of the source water protection area, the portion of the watershed or groundwater recharge area that may contribute water and thus possible pollutants to the water supply. Following this delineation, a list of significant potential sources of drinking water contamination in the source water protection area is developed. The third component involves determination of the water supply's susceptibility to contamination from these identified sources. The susceptibility determination can be either an absolute measure of the potential for contamination or a relative comparison between sources. Finally, the source water assessment results are distributed to the public. The assessment is not considered complete until it has been communicated to the community. Source water assessments are intended to serve as the basis for local source water protection programs. From the federal and state level all the way down to regional and local organizations, regulations, guidelines, and financial assistance are available to help water providers and local communities protect their source water supplies. The American Water Works Association has developed a series of utility management standards to help water and wastewater systems by promoting improvements in the quality of services and efficient management. The G300 Standard for Source Water Protection provides a general framework for drinking water systems of any size and type in developing source water protection programs that are locally specific and variable in scope. While there may be differences in the details of the program, the G300 standard applies equally to either groundwater or surface water programs. The standard identifies 6 essential elements of a source water protection program: vision, source water characterization, program goals, action plan, implementation, and program evaluation. The vision guides the development and implementation of a source water protection program by aligning priorities and resources. It is a statement of the water system's commitment to source water protection. Source water characterization consists of assessing the source water and the land or subsurface area from which the source water is derived to understand and prioritize the key water quality issues and contaminant sources. In many cases, states have already completed an initial source water assessment that can be used as a starting point for further characterization. Program goals and objectives are established to guide the source water protection program and address both current and potential issues. In general, effective goals are measurable and prioritized to address the local issues of greatest concern based on stakeholder input. The action plan identifies activities to be conducted to achieve the established goals based on vision and source water characterization. This component includes specific actions, priorities, and timeline for implementation, resources needed, and measures of success for each part of the plan. Implementation of the action plan is key to the success of the overall source water protection program. This step involves performing the planned activities according to the established timeline and addressing unexpected challenges and barriers through an adaptive and iterative management approach. Source water protection is an ongoing process that can be continuously improved and updated. Periodic review and modification of the vision, characterization, goals, action plans, and implementation elements are conducted to measure the success of the program and maintain or improve it over time. Each of these elements are described in greater detail in the associated guidebook that AWWA has published for implementing Standard G300 at the water system level. The guidebook also contains checklists that can be used by water systems to develop and enhance their source water protection programs. The Water Research Foundation has published a pair of reports on a vision and roadmap for drinking water source protection to help utilities move forward with their source water protection efforts and proactively improve or maintain the quality of their drinking water sources. This was a collaborative effort by source water protection experts to document and share observations, resources, and case studies for source water protection programs across the country. While there are a number of regulatory programs and initiatives aimed at source water protection, such as the sole source aquifer and underground injection control programs, successful source water protection programs are often implemented as a community-based effort. The Source Water Collaborative has developed a how-to collaborate toolkit with guidance and contacts to help develop and enhance local partnerships to protect drinking water sources. Source water protection involves community support, public education, land use planning, and emergency response. All activities that take place on the local level. Public education and awareness are important components of effective source water protection programs. In many cases, residents and businesses contribute to pollution simply because they don't realize their activities can pollute water supplies. Citizens usually respond when they realize they are protecting their own water supply. This is why there is often a need for public education campaigns that encourage environmentally responsible landscaping and lawn care, use of pesticides and herbicides, and proper disposal of materials. Something as simple as labeling storm drains serves as a reminder that oils, chemicals, and other hazardous materials should never be disposed down the drain. In some communities, school kids and members of various civic organizations have organized to mark the storm drains in their area. In addition, of course, water conservation campaigns send a message to all consumers of the value of this important resource. Communities may also consider various incentives and controls to address potential threats to the source water. Incentives can include technical and financial assistance for activities such as land conservation. For example, the U.S. Department of Agricultural Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, provides assistance to private landowners and operators for their voluntary implementation of various conservation practices, such as establishing easements to restore forested lands and improving management of agricultural lands. Natural vegetation can be very effective at filtering contaminants before they reach source water and then water intakes. Plants slow the speed of runoff, minimizing erosion and the potential disposition of sediment into rivers and lakes. Therefore, some communities have incorporated constructed wetlands, installed vegetated buffer strips along shorelines, or created grass swales that encourage infiltration as well as collect runoff when natural areas in the watershed have been disturbed. Future development planning that incorporates the preservation of environmentally sensitive areas can be an effective tool for source water protection. Local regulatory controls can be implemented to manage land use through zoning ordinances, as well as proper material handling through regulations for the use, storage, and disposal of potentially hazardous materials by businesses and residents. Accidents can still happen, even with controls, incentives, and general awareness in place. Emergency response planning is an important part of the overall program to minimize and mitigate the impact in case such an event does occur. Community representatives can help provide valuable input in the emergency response planning process. Source water protection challenges facing water utilities in the future are considerable. This includes the continued emergence of new contaminants that water systems may not yet understand how to test for and treat. Emerging contaminants are those that are new to the environment, such as a new disease-causing organism or chemical. Industries create and distribute new chemical compounds nearly every day. As these new substances reach our source waters, it is not always possible for water providers to have the appropriate testing protocols or to understand the possible associated health impacts. It is unknown whether these substances are present in our raw water supplies or how successful conventional treatment processes will be in detecting and removing some of these new substances. Water resource planning and source water protection continues to be the key to a multiple barrier approach to protecting drinking water. Fortunately, along with the challenges comes an increasing awareness on the part of water providers, local citizens, and the government. There are more sources of information, opportunities for multi-agency cooperation, and funding resources available today than at any time in the history of water treatment. Water providers, now more than ever, have an opportunity to use these many resources and take proactive steps to protect source water.
Okay, so it's 2 high tides.
Alliances with local communities, municipalities, counties, and state government can help coordinate efforts. Supporting grants and community funding may also help in starting source water protection projects. Small projects may lead the way to larger opportunities to expand protection efforts. Remember, source water protection activities can generally be more cost-effective than treating a contaminated source or finding an alternative supply. Pristine source water, while the goal of many water suppliers, isn't always possible to obtain or ensure. However, proactive source water management is an important first step toward maintaining high source water quality and delivering safe drinking water to families and communities.
That was kind of a long video, but it was good. That video actually covers not only the chapter 4, but we're going to get into more source water in chapter 7. And I'm going to go back on my little video thing because the back screen that I have here, if y'all can see it, this is the Mississippi River. Now it's kind of interesting because there's so much that was in that video that I find interesting. And if you can put your brain around it, it's going to help you when you actually take this test. Because for one thing, you know, out here, we don't get a lot of water. And then when we do get water, it's in a watershed. Like in Arizona, we have what's called Lake Roosevelt. And even in California, you know, either they have deep wells, like our wells are anywhere from 2,000 feet and deeper, or they're watersheds that they have to protect. And if you've been watching on the news, we've been having a lot of fires, and all those fires have been around our watersheds. So you've seen where they come in with all those tankers and they drop all those chemicals. Those chemicals are great for putting out fires, but they're also a means of a contaminant. And right now we're looking at, it's a PFOA, those PFOS, and you're hearing people talk about it, especially on the regulatory side, because that stuff is getting into our groundwater and it's causing issues. So that's kind of a good idea of why we have to really look at our source water, like the video also mentioned. But I also find it interesting that when we talked a little bit about the Safe Drinking Water Act, both Monday and Tuesday, what people may not know, and as the video alluded, so in 1948 is when the Pollution Control Act came about. And that is your 40 CFR. And that was EPA, basically them becoming established. And then within the 40 CFR, you have all those acts, such as ours, which is the Safe Drinking Water Act, and then the Clean Water Act. But the Clean Water Act actually came about in 1972 before even the Safe Drinking Water Act, because again, of all this source pollution. And then, as it mentioned, 1974, that's when the Safe Drinking Water Act came about. And when I was thinking in the 70s, that's like when the Brady Bunch was around. So this stuff's not really that old. And then, as it also mentioned, in 86, there was a real big change in terms of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And then more contaminants that MCLs basically are recognized through the Safe Drinking Water Act came into play as well. So that really made us look at our source water and then how we're going to protect that source water. So in chapter 4 doesn't talk about the point source pollutants or non-point. That'll be in chapter 7, and I'm going to go over that with you. But it is kind of interesting because I want to show you on page 116 in your book, and I'm going to switch my camera to my document scanner so you can kind of see what it is if you don't have your book. But it talks briefly about selecting methods of treatment. So this is on page 116. So if you can use groundwater, that's great. But what I'm finding, and I'm sure you all can tell me, you can either put it in the chat. Do you guys use surface water? If you do use surface water, when you move your mouse next to the share screen, you're going to see that chat box. So if you click on chat, a box will open. So tell me if yes, if you use surface water, or type in no. Hopefully y'all can find that little chat box. So Stone does not use surface water. If you hit Alt on your keypad, push down the Alt and then the letter H, I think the chat box will open as well. So Andrew, Dana, and I can see you, Matthew. Give me a thumbs up. Do you guys? Andrew has surface water. Do you have surface water, Matthew? Give me a thumbs up. Nope, it's groundwater. Interesting. Because it seems like back east where y'all get a lot of rain. And if you have a lot of rain, a lot of times your water table is going to be more shallow. And so people end up treating the surface water anyways because of the contaminants or the taste odors from the decomposition, or I should say decomposing materials that are in the ground. It gives you that sulfur type of smell in your water. So going back to this book part, once you know the type of source water you're going to be dealing with, that's when you pick out what type of treatment process you're going to use. So on page 116, there's different types. Like some people can use what's called air stripping and aeration, and that helps with volatiles. And even naturally, as water passes through rivers, if there's baffles, things that stir up that water, it's going to release some of those volatiles into the atmosphere. So we're going to talk about different means of air stripping and aeration. And then water treatment is not adding chlorine to a well. I just want you all to know that. So this is not a distribution exam. This is where they're actually using chemicals to create a flock, and then it's going to settle out. So it gives you a little introduction into the coagulation process. And all coagulation means is we're adding a coagulant to the water. Now, some folks, you'll see this sometimes in certain industries, like if you have an industry that produces semiconductors, things like that, they need to have a high purity of water. They might use what's known as ion exchange. And ion exchange is also used for water softeners. So sometimes if you have a company that has a lot of boilers, they'll use ion exchange because the hardness of the water. And so we have to think about that. And then, of course, chemical precipitation, which is on here, is still similar to your coagulation, but it's a matter of what you're going to precipitate out. Like some people have problems with iron and manganese in their wells, so they'll use chemical precipitation to pull the iron out of solution, and then they'll filter it. So if you have a well that requires chemical treatment, then yes, you need to have a water treatment license. And then the last one is talking about desalination. And I was hoping that we'd get some folks from Florida in this class, because in Florida, there are a lot of desalination plants, and there's a movement, and same with California, there's a movement of getting a license that's specific for operators that actually do desalination, because there you're dealing with membranes. And just to let you know, even on wells, like for certain types of removal, they'll use the membrane process. So that's pretty much what chapter 4 goes over. It's just kind of an introduction and dealing with the different types of source water. So now I'm going to kind of keep moving along with the presentation. Stop my video. Whoops, stop the share. Oh, before I put this back up, y'all good? Do you have any questions? I know some of you are kind of shy. Everybody okay? And don't forget, there's a little icon where you can do a reaction. So give me a thumbs up if everybody's okay. I want to make sure that Dana's still alive, Stone's still alive. Andrew, are you okay? The reactions are kind of little buttons over there.
I'm okay.
You okay? Perfection. Oops. I'm the one that's having an issue with this. Whoop, here we go. All right. So I'm going to share the screen again. Here we go. Boom. And so the video did talk a little bit about these different types of zones. Oops. So now I can kind of go back and show you this picture, because really this picture is pretty loaded. It's a loaded picture of information, but I like it. So when you have a well, for instance, not only are we looking at the different types of aquifers, but when they dig a well, they have what's known as the lateral area of influence. And you know, if you've done a sanitary survey, which the first class or the first day, Monday, I know Stone has had one of these before. Usually this lateral area of influence, some states they'll say 50 feet. So this is in a complete circle around that wellhead. And the reason why they look at that particular area is because anything that gets in this area, the lateral area influence, when a well kicks on, depending upon the depth of it, a well creates a cone of depression. So any contaminants that's in this zone is going to be sucked down into the water. So when the video was also mentioning about folks with septic tanks, or let's say leach fields or what have you, we have to be careful, because if they are in this zone and those septic tanks are designed to leach out, then that's what's going to cause issues with our groundwater. So again, in the book, when it talks about certain types of contaminants, we're concerned about microbials, because we don't want any of the E. coli or cryptosporidium, as the video mentioned, to get within this area. So it also talked a little bit about feedlots, and it goes into about the point source pollution versus that non-point. But if you have a lot of dairy and those folks in this area, again, any of that runoff, once it gets into this area of influence, it's going to cause contamination. Another thing about this picture, it talks about the water table. So when you see the next video about wells, it's going to talk about what's known as the static level of the water, and that's when the well isn't pumping. Now the cone of depression is when the well kicks on, and even though this picture says pumping level, we also refer to this as our safe yield. And so when you have hydrologists, it's usually folks that study not only the ground, but hydrology for wells. What they look at is what's known as drawdown. So the drawdown is between your safe yield and where the water table would actually be when it's not pumping. So we want to make sure that we maintain this cone of depression. But what happens during areas when you have drought conditions, the water table is going to drop. So some of the reservations that I deal with, they're out there monthly taking levels, static levels of the well, because if this water table drops, so does the cone of depression. And that means if we go lower than our safe yield, then it's going to cause cavitation. And not only that, but you're going to have land subsidence. So there's a lot of things that they look at in terms of a well. And you'll see that in the next chapter. I like drawing all over my slides. I took this picture because this is right behind my house, and this is my neighbor behind us. So this is Arizona, my friends. And this was right before the summer, so I want to say about June. And it's interesting because, again, in the next chapter, it kind of hits and misses a little bit of how wells are drilled. But this guy right here, I know I can't say the word, but he is a bad dude, because he is drilling this well all by himself. And if this was like a city employee, there'd be like 100 people here. So I was pretty impressed that he was drilling this. But this is a typical rig setup when you're talking about a drill. But then it just gets a little different when you're dealing with the soil, because it's interesting. It looks like plastic because this is plastic. And when the video that I show you coming up here talks about the casing, casing comes in different types of material. So the casing goes into the hole, and then inside of this, there's a pipe which pumps the water up through the piping, and then the casing protects that pipe. And then they're also going to put a submersible on this as well. So this is what they're going to be referring to when you see some of these pictures in this next coming chapter. And then when it comes to groundwater, just as I mentioned before in the video, also talked about, you know, there's different sources, and it's all dependent upon the topography of the earth. And, you know, some areas you can't see it too much, like in Texas, where it's flat. I thought Oklahoma was going to be flat, but it seems like they kind of have rolling hills like where I live. But the thing about the source water and also the topography, the aquifer tends to drain in the direction of the topography. So that's why at times we have to look in different areas, either further out, like above us, to see what's going to be coming our way in terms of contaminants. And then some people have springs. And this is really interesting because here there's a tribe that's right in the center of the Navajos, and they're the Hopis. And they actually have a spring where the water comes up naturally, and it's in a box when it's in its purest form. It's like a concrete box that they have. The water comes up, and that's how they would draw their water. But once they start to take that water and put it into a storage for holding, then they have to treat it. And we'll talk about things like that a little later. And then the video did explain in pretty good detail about confined versus unconfined water. And then that's when you get into also pressure as well. So there's the different types of source water for ground. And then sometimes in this picture, like here, you can see like folks in Louisiana and along the coast, they have to worry about groundwater being intruded by seawater. So that's another issue that we have to consider. Even along the Oregon and Colorado, or not Colorado, California and Washington coast, some of the wells over time have issues with seawater intrusion. So this is some of the things that they talk about in terms of groundwater. And this is just going over springs, and I kind of already alluded to that. And it's kind of cool if you ever go out hiking, you come across the box that's next to a river, and they're using that box. It's pretty deep into the ground, and the infiltration from the earth will come up into that box, and it's kind of like a shallow well. Now, this happens a lot, especially back east. And we'll also talk about water tables when we get into treatment, because if you have a treatment plant, for instance, where you have basins that are in the ground, we have to be careful of shallow water tables, because if that basin is empty, a water table like this can push the basin right out of the ground. So that's kind of interesting when it comes to shallow water. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll pump the water out from underneath the plant, and then we'll discharge it into a river. But this is actually a very saturated area where this water was coming up. We would think that was gold here in Arizona. It was like, that's gold. It's liquid gold. And then these are natural hot springs. And this is actually a picture in Colorado. But some of these springs that are natural and there's hot, they have to deal with other types of impurities. So if you ever had opportunity to go to a hot spring, the water tends to have a lot of sulfur in it. So unfortunately, their wells deal with sulfurs or sulfites. And then they do have a river that goes through Colorado where they can use the surface water as well for surface water treatment versus using these wells. So those are things that we have to consider in terms of source water. Makes me want to go swimming. It's been hot here. Down in the valley, or in Phoenix, that's what we call the valley. They got up to 120 and it was hot there for an entire month. I live in northern portion of Arizona and it wasn't as warm, but it was still over 100 degrees. So total dissolved solids, TDS, you'll see that as more of an importance to drinking water, because when we went over chemistry, we talked about pH. And we know that water is the universal solvent. So when water sits there in an aquifer, it's going to dissolve all the minerals that are there naturally in the earth. And so that's why well water tends to be a little harder than even surface water. So total dissolved solids is something that we consider. And then depending upon the type of treatment process we have, it kind of says right here, our filters are designed to have a certain type of straining. And that's where you get this word right here. But when you're dealing with a RO membrane, for instance, they'll talk about something like microns instead. So these particles can be very small. They can be colloidals, which goes in and out of suspension, for instance, or they can actually be a dissolved solid like sugar when it dissolves in water. It's there, you can't see it, but we have to look at that kind of stuff. And then some of these dissolved solids, as I mentioned, like iron and manganese. Now, iron, we know it's going to be there because it makes water a reddish color. But usually in surface water treatment, because we add chemicals, we can bring those solids out of solution and then precipitate them out. So they'll look at all that type of stuff as well before they determine what type of treatment or source they're going to use. Let's see how we're doing on time here. I got one more video I got to show y'all. We're doing good. So it is kind of interesting. This is just, again, get you in a state of mind. You don't really need to know these numbers for the exam, but it's just talking about total dissolved solids in terms of whether water is brackish, because usually if you're dealing with brackish water like this is where they'll use membranes. And this is when you get into reverse osmosis versus the TDS that's in fresh water. So this here can be conventional water treatment. And then that's what the primary focus is going to be on when we go through this book. And these, my friends, are some of those minerals that affect water quality. Now, those of you who missed Monday, it's pretty easy. We'll talk about like the different elements that you need to know on a periodic table, but they do ask you that on the test. Like you need to know the elemental form of sodium, which is Na. Iron is Fe. Here we have manganese, but with iron, you usually have problems with, I always have problems saying it, manganese. It's the MN one. So they'll ask questions about elements. And same with chlorine, because there's a difference between Cl, the element, versus Cl2, the gas. So we'll be covering all that. Now here's something that you do want to write down. And that is the name for NTU. Because when it comes to turbidity, that is what tells us how good of a job we're doing in terms of water treatment. And also it's going to tell us about our source water and what we're going to do in terms of treatment. So this is the measurement of that unit. It's nephelometric turbidity unit. That's what NTU stands for. So we'll be talking a lot about turbidity. NTU, it's also in the book. And then it does use a light source. Now, hopefully some of you got to see if you went to USET's conference, they had the bomb person there from Hawk. And if they ever do another conference, I hope that Hawkman comes back again, because he had all his toys. And they were also measuring turbidity. So the neat thing about how he was explaining stuff is how some of these work. So for instance, in order to measure turbidity, what it does, it uses a light. And then we'll also talk about colorimetric and spectrophotometers as we go through this class. I did already tell you about these types of well terms. And again, like your safe field, for instance, and then the drawdown. And worst case scenario, if there was a question on the test, they want to know what the drawdown would be. And it's a super easy math problem, because they'll tell you the depth of the water table. Let's say it's at 100 feet. But the safe field, they'll tell you it's 120 feet. So all you got to use is a little bit of common sense. There's no formula from this. The distance between the two is drawdown. So the drawdown's 20 feet. That's how you figure it out. Okay, so I'm starting to get into some of these well terms, which would be chapter 4. So before I put on the next video, and the next video is an important one, because again, that's really going to hit chapter 4. But I like to see that everybody's still alive. Everybody alive? You okay, Matthew?
Hola.
Andrew's alive. Margaret's alive.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, and Stone's alive. And I know Dana, the way her computer's set up, is a little hard. So I'm hoping she's still alive too. Perfect. Okay, so let me get this next video started for y'all. Oops, your screen share. I just want to verify. Can you see this? If someone could say yes or no.
We can,
It froze up on groundwater.
Okay, perfect. I just had stopped it because it was flashing something to me that said it wasn't working. Okay, I am going to start this then.
Although it may appear that our world has an abundant supply of water, in reality, more than 97% is salt water in our oceans. Less than 1% is fresh water that exists in lakes, rivers, streams, and groundwater. Groundwater is playing an increasingly important role in our water supply as surface water availability decreases. But surface waters often intercept groundwater, so additional emphasis is being placed on better understanding the relationship
Melissa,
between surface
I can't
and
see
groundwater systems.
the video.
Melissa, can you hear me?
Okay, you guys can't see the video?
No, just the page that says play on it.
Oh, okay. Let me fix this then. I was wondering. Okay, I'm gonna try it again. Oh, okay. All right, I'm gonna start it over. And then if you see the video, just say yay. Okay, here we go. All right, here. Can you see where it shows blue right now? And I'm about to hit play.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, it's gonna work now. Sorry about that.
Although it may appear that our world has an abundant supply of water, in reality, more than 97% is salt water in our oceans. Less than 1% is fresh water that exists in lakes, rivers, streams, and groundwater. Groundwater is playing an increasingly important role in our water supply as surface water availability decreases. But surface waters often intercept groundwater, so additional emphasis is being placed on better understanding the relationship between surface and groundwater systems. Because groundwater and surface water resources are closely related, many events that occur above ground can impact an underground water supply, such as changes in land use, discharges of waste, or accidental spills. As a result, water providers need to monitor surface activities to determine the impact on their water systems. Groundwater is defined as water contained in interconnected pores located below the water table in an unconfined or confined aquifer. An aquifer is soil or rocks that transmit water. Confining units do not. Transmissivity indicates the ability of water to flow through an aquifer and provides a means to compare the productivity of different aquifers. The quantity and quality of groundwater depends on factors such as the aquifer transmissivity, the recharge rate, and proximity to potential sources of contamination. Precipitation that percolates downward through porous surface soils is the primary source of water for groundwater. Surface areas having this downward flow are called recharge areas. Recharge areas primarily allow fresh rainwater into the aquifer. Typically, recharge of fresh water occurs at the top of an aquifer. Without recharge or movement of the groundwater, the aquifer would become brackish through dissolution of the minerals in the ground. This is why deeper aquifers have more dissolved solids. Groundwater is sometimes perceived to be better or more pristine than surface waters, since contamination pathways into groundwaters are not as obvious. However, groundwater can contain substances that are hard to remove, such as naturally occurring arsenic or man-added contaminants, such as trichloroethylene and fertilizer. More groundwater contamination is likely to be found in the future as decades of human activities, including waste discharges, agricultural practices, leaking underground fuel tanks, and manufacturing activities accumulate. The addition of nutrients and industrial chemicals into the groundwater can cause loss of use of the resource or expensive remediation. Groundwater occurs in aquifers under two different conditions. Near the land surface, water only partly fills an exposed aquifer. The upper surface of the saturated zone is free to rise and decline in direct relation to precipitation. The water in this type of aquifer is unconfined, or a water table aquifer. Source water protection efforts are designed to protect water table wells. Semi-confined and confined aquifers are separated from land surface and other aquifers by confining units. Water table aquifers are the more easily contaminated aquifers due to proximity of surface activities. When the water pressure in a confined aquifer causes the water in a well to rise higher than the top of its confining unit, then it is termed an artesian aquifer. Commonly, these artesian wells may flow at land surface. Groundwater can be found near the surface, or it can be found hundreds of feet below the ground, like it is in much of the western United States, where it was trapped thousands of years ago. If the aquifer doesn't recharge locally, or if water levels decrease each year, the potential to drain the aquifer and degrade water quality increases. This is called mining and means that the groundwater supply may not be sustainable. The USGS published a study in 2009 that outlined the condition of aquifers in the U.S. What they found is that there are large areas in the West, the breadbasket states of the Great Plains, and even areas on the East Coast where aquifers are being drawn down by pumping at levels that exceed recharge. Mining can occur in any formation, not just in the West. For example, mining occurred in the eastern Carolinas to such an extent that the larger utilities converted to surface water sources, and several now use the mined aquifer for aquifer storage and recovery. Long-term mining of aquifers will have negative impacts on the local economy in these areas and to utilities and farmers who use this water. Commonly, groundwater models are used to assess aquifer sustainable yields based on a complex set of technical and social factors. So how do we keep our aquifers recharged? A key component of groundwater management is maintaining or enhancing the recharge rate and maintaining withdrawals at a sustainable rate. Open space, as opposed to pervious pavement, is important. Protecting wetlands, which are often recharge areas, is similarly important as water supplies as well as ecological systems. Wells are used to extract water from aquifers. A well is a long tube that penetrates the aquifer. The well casing is a lining for the drilled hole that seals out contaminated water from the surface and undesirable water from formations above the aquifer. The casing also keeps the aquifer materials from going into the well and collapsing it. Inside the casing is the column pipe. The column pipe is where the water actually travels from the aquifer to the surface. There is often a well screen on the bottom of the column pipe. Wells rely on pumps to move water through the pipe. The pump may be located on the surface above the well, or they may be installed at the bottom of the column pipe. Pumps move water from the aquifer to the surface. In doing so, the aquifer level near the well tends to decrease or draw down. Large drawdowns are harmful and usually mean the well is over-pumping the aquifer, or there are problems in the well. After the well is constructed, it needs to be developed. Well development is necessary to eliminate sand content, silt, and turbidity in the well, and is an integral part of the construction. Disinfection is also needed upon well completion and every time the well is entered for maintenance. Ongoing efforts should include management of land uses surrounding a well or well field. Water moves to the well in the cone of influence. The cone of influence is the distance from the well that some form of drawdown occurs. Drawdown will affect other wells, so care must be taken not to cause other wells to go dry by overpumping. A well field occurs where many wells are located within close proximity to one another. The drawdowns overlap, so wells must be spaced to prevent mining of the aquifer. The aquifer level in the vicinity of a well may recede seasonally or during long dry periods when recharge to the aquifer is at its minimum. The installation of additional wells in an area with overlapping cones of depression can also cause the water table to recede. Groundwater modeling should be used as a tool for design of wells and well fields. Groundwater modeling will provide useful information regarding yield and well spacing. Several types of pumps are used in wells today, including centrifugal, deep well turbine, submersible, rotary, and impulse pumps. A centrifugal pump uses centrifugal force to move a liquid through a change in elevation or against a total dynamic head. Fluid from the outer tips of the pump's impeller is thrown into the volute or diffuser and then into the discharge line. The deep well turbine pump is not really a turbine, but rather a combination of several stages of centrifugal impellers connected in a series to a common shaft. A submersible pump is a turbine pump with its motor close coupled beneath the bowls of the pumping unit. The entire unit is installed underwater. The pump motor is cooled by water flowing vertically past the motor to the pump intake. These are the most common pumps for wells over 20 feet deep. A rotary pump combines the positive discharge characteristic of the reciprocating pump with the constant, steady discharge of a centrifugal pump. Impulse pumps produce pumping action by directly applying pressurized air or water into the well below the water level to force groundwater to the surface. Pump selection primarily depends on economics. The type of pump selected should give the best, most economical service. Factors to be considered include capacity, depth of well and pumping level, inside diameter of the well, condition of the borehole and whether it is straight or crooked, chemical and abrasive properties of the water, friction loss, and type of available power and costs. Wells usually provide relatively consistent, maintenance-free water supplies over many years. Mechanical failures of pumps can be caused by wear, age, or lightening, but in many cases, problems can be a symptom of fouling or plugging. These problems can then result in excessive drawdowns, loss of specific capacity, or inefficiencies. No pump should operate at a rate at which it breaks suction. Besides damage to the pump, the water level fluctuates violently when a pump breaks suction. Pumping equipment should be adjusted if danger of breaking suction becomes apparent. The fluctuation creates a surge in the well and in the water-bearing formation outside the well. The force may collapse the well if it is not properly stabilized. With the loss of suction, air mixes with the water and causes it to appear milky. Air bubbles may also damage the distribution system by causing air pockets. To regain efficiency, the well pump is usually set deeper if conditions permit, or one bowl or impeller is removed from the pump assembly to change the operating characteristics of the pump. The only way to determine if physical or mechanical problems are causing well deterioration is to monitor the aquifer levels and to perform specific capacity analyses on a regular basis. The specific capacity should be compared to past performance at least annually on each well. Evidence of a physical problem when the specific capacity declines includes increased air in the discharge, increased sand or other turbidity in the water pumped, excessive wear on the pump, and increased color or settlement around the well, which may indicate large amounts of sand removal. Specific capacity may be the most informative single factor in well performance. Specific capacity is the pumping rate per foot of drawdown. When plugging problems occur, the drawdown increases and the specific capacity decreases. Particulate plugging, corrosion, and sand pumping impact the performance of the pump and well. Well deterioration problems also usually have microbiological fouling. Aquifers are ideal environments for certain bacteria adapted for these conditions. Biofouling exists to some extent in all wells. There is tremendous surface area for colonization. The temperatures are relatively constant and moderate. The flow of water provides a consistent nutrient supply, and except for the pumping zone, the water is not disturbed. All ideal for colonization. Biofouling will damage the screens and impact water quality. A downhole camera can be used to look for visible signs of biofilm deposits. Any equipment pulled out of wells should be thoroughly cleaned so other wells are not contaminated. This video clip shows the stainless steel screen in the bottom of a shallow water supply well. Groundwater contains a variety of chemicals resulting from natural sources, as well as from overlying land uses and local management practices. Common treatment techniques include aeration, oxidation, lime softening and ion exchange, filtration, adsorption, and absorption, corrosion control, disinfection, and fluoridation. Treatment depends on what is in the water. Aeration mixes water with air to transfer gas from the water to the air. Aeration can remove objectionable dissolved gases such as hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide. Aeration also removes certain volatile organic compounds and reduces iron and manganese. Aeration of water with significant amounts of hydrogen sulfide can create odor problems and a corrosive environment for treatment plants and equipment. Aeration should not precede membrane filtration. Although not considered to be a health hazard, iron and manganese can add color to water, which stains laundry and plumbing fixtures. Potassium permanganate and aeration will remove these. Oxidation removes color, taste, and odors. Common chemical additives are potassium permanganate, ozone and chlorine compounds. Moderate amounts of dissolved minerals make water more palatable, as mineral-free water tastes flat to most people. Excessive levels of minerals or chemical constituents in groundwater supplies can cause a wide variety of issues. Hardness in drinking water comes from contact with soil and rock formation. Hardness increases the amount of soap needed to produce a foam and causes scale in hot water pipes, heaters, and boilers. Softening of hard water is accomplished by chemical precipitation with lime or lime and soda ash, a sodium cycle ion exchange process, or with membrane processes. Filtration has traditionally been used to remove turbidity from surface water supplies, but granular, membrane, and cake filters are also used for some groundwater. Adsorption is the collection of a substance onto the surface of another. Absorption is the penetration of the substance into the solid. The most commonly used media for this is activated carbon. Corrosion is the deterioration of metallic structures in contact with water, usually with loss of metal to solution. Corrosion can affect both the structural capacity of the pipe and the quality of the water. Strategies for reducing corrosivity include increasing the pH or alkalinity, or adding a corrosion inhibitor. Common chemical additives for increasing the pH include lime, caustic soda, and potassium hydroxide, while soda ash, sodium bicarbonate, is added to increase alkalinity. Disinfection is the destruction of pathogenic microorganisms. Common chemical oxidizing agents are chlorine, chlorine dioxide, chloramines, iodine, or ozone. Some groundwater contains naturally high levels of fluoride, and in some cases, fluoride must be reduced to acceptable levels by ion exchange. Salts are common in deeper aquifers or along the coast and cannot be removed chemically. Reverse osmosis membranes are often used for this purpose. The principles are the same as for desalination, but at much lower pressure. Groundwater quality is as important as the quantity of supply. Therefore, the protection and management of groundwater quality is a key concern for water providers. As mentioned earlier, groundwater systems are susceptible to contamination. A wellhead protection program reduces the potential for contaminants to leach into the groundwater by identifying and managing recharge areas specific to the well field. Groundwater-related disease outbreaks and associated illnesses have risen as a result of contamination from both chemical and biological concerns. In addition, many layers of rock that were previously thought to be highly confining may contain fractures or intrusions such as wells that create pathways for contaminants to move into underlying aquifers. Prevention is simpler, more effective, and less costly than cleanup measures. In developing a wellhead protection program, water suppliers should involve the various diverse perspectives and interests of the entire community. As part of effective wellfield management, the proper operation of a groundwater system includes the gathering, compiling, and recording of a wide variety of data. Record keeping begins during the design and construction phase of each project. Well diameter, proposed total depth, pump design, and materials to be used for the screen and casing should be recorded. When the production well has been installed, As-built details should be recorded, such as the driller's log of the materials encountered during drilling, diameters and depth of well casing and screens, surveyed elevations of water level measurement point, and the total depth of the well. Pump data should include the type, make, and horsepower of the installed pump, the pump setting, setting of device for measuring the water level, and all information provided by the pump and motor manufacturer, such as capacity and efficiency data. As the pump is put into service, recorded data should include water level measurements made before, during, and after the drawdown pumping test, a record of the pumping rate, hydrographs generated during the test, and a copy of the hydrogeologist report. The total pumpage for each well should be recorded monthly and graphed to illustrate the seasonal and yearly production rates. This information will also be helpful in establishing the need for maintenance and service of the wells as its performance decreases. Records of water levels in the well during periods of non-use and during pumping should be noted. Trends in the pumping level with time can reflect losses in efficiency in the well over time. The groundwater temperature should be recorded and plotted to obtain base data for determining future expectations. In areas where recharge to the aquifer may come from infiltration of surface water, that water temperature should also be recorded. This helps evaluate infiltration and recharge and indicates where the groundwater is under the influence of surface water. The apparent specific capacity or ratio of the yield of each well to its drawdown is used to plot the operation trend of each well. This number is expressed in gallons per minute per foot of drawdown. The differential between the pumping water level inside the well and the water level in the aquifer outside the well can be measured in any nearby monitoring or observation well. This value can identify changes in drawdown that relate to well production and efficiency or regional water level changes. No two wells are identical, and variability is the norm. Well maintenance activity should also be recorded, such as the dates maintenance was performed, results of pre- and post-maintenance pumping tests, methods and materials used for maintenance, and other factors such as the coloration of the pumped water, amount of sand removed, odors, and water quality analyses. If a well is abandoned, be sure to keep a record of the date the well was taken out of service, the methods and materials used to abandon the well, the reasons the well was taken out of service, its specific location, and the historic performance of the abandoned well. Groundwater is an essential tool for communities to meet their needs for growth, development, and jobs. It is a liquid asset and must be managed to provide a sustainable water supply for the future. Our use should not limit the ability of future generations to use the same water supplies we use today. It's critical to properly manage groundwater to maintain its long-term viability.
Okay. I'm going to show you chapter. Oh, you all got your books, right? These are expensive books. You should all have them. Okay, so we're in chapter 5, which is, it starts on page 119, but I actually want you to go to page 122. And then, I don't know if Jack's there. Right now, we got the like Brady Bunch
I'm
looking.
here.
Oh, so, Jack. So right now we're like in this Brady Bunch looking thing. How would it show where it's my picture's big so I can put my document reader on there? Do I hit
It's-
just full screen?
As soon as you go share screen, it should automatically make your screen large.
Okay, so I'm gonna change my video to my document scanner.
Uh-huh.
Whoops. Oh. Okay. And then once
Oh.
so how do they see it full screen?
Give me just a second.
I wonder if I hit enter full screen. I'm gonna hit
Yep.
full screen and you guys tell me if it's big.
Okay.
Whoops. Oh.
No.
Oh, okay. I think it's speaker view.
Uh-huh.
Uh-oh.
Try
Can
speaker view.
I did. It looks little. Okay, let me try something else. Oh,
Well, we can see your book. We just can't read. I mean, I have it open to page 122. So, I
okay.
mean, I can see it. I just can't read the text.
Okay. And that's fine. I just want to make sure that you see this because what they're going to talk about, and sometimes explaining it versus reading through it will make a little sense, and then y'all can go back through to read. I like these AWWA books because they put key information in green boxes, and I always tell my classes to make sure you read those because they're there for a purpose. But then those terms that we kind of went over was pretty cool because it showed you how to look at the static level, the drawdown. But I kind of liked how they explained that specific capacity. So before I get to specific capacity, they have all these illustrations. Like the picture that's here on page 122, this is for a submersible well. So this is what a submersible well setup would look like. But the picture on the right doesn't do it very good justice. And when we talk about pumps and motors on chapter 17 and 18, I'm going to show you different types of well hookups. But here it talks about the sanitary sill. And what that is, it sticks out of the ground. And that sill is access to the groundwater itself. So if you're in an area that floods, they have to consider the topography around you. So that sanitary sill can either stick out of the ground a foot, or like ours at my house, it's almost 2 feet out of the ground. So that's what a sanitary sill does. It protects from any type of surface or flooding to enter your well. And then the nice thing that it shows is there's an air vent. And if you're familiar with sanitary surveys, they talk about that screen that's on that vent, because that vent's there for 2 reasons. One, when your well shuts off, it creates a vacuum. So if that vent is clogged, it's going to cave in any type of casing, or it's going to damage the pump for your well itself. But then it also gives us access to sound the well. So that's a really nice picture to see that information. But then on one of the pictures next to it, it does talk about the casing itself, because the whole purpose of the casing, it's like a straw that you're putting into the ground, but then the well goes inside of that straw. And the well pipe is where the water comes up. So that casing is protecting from any type of cave-ins, especially within that top layer. Now, when you get into the higher grades, sometimes they talk about the depth of the casing, but the problem with that, it's different in every state. Like they might say the minimum depth is 100 feet of casing. And then if you didn't know this, like the picture I showed you of the folks that were drilling a well behind us, we drilled our own well. So my water table is at 100 feet, but my well is 400 feet down. So they don't look too far from us, but I was interested to see how deep their well is going to be, because as the video mentioned, when you have 2 wells that are in the same well field, that cone of depression could cause issues with your safe field, and you could cavitate the well field. So every pipe that they put down into a well, if you didn't know this, but they're 20 feet in increments. So I was able to go over there when everybody was gone and count how many pipes they had. And then that way I figured out how deep their well's going to be. So my well is a lot deeper. Now, the next couple pages that I want you to look at is when they actually get into that specific capacity. And it's a little deceiving. Now, they mention how we get specific capacity. That's what determines your pump, because your pump's rated in gallons per minute. So all of you who have wells, you should know your specific capacity. But what the problem is that this little formula gives you is you're taking your well yield and you're dividing it by the drawdown. So you have to figure out what your drawdown is. And then that's what I showed you earlier. So what we'll do is we'll sound our well. We'll put a sounder down in it. We'll measure where that static level is. And then we can also measure where the safe yield is. And then when you take those two numbers and subtract it, that's when I said 100 minus 120, that gives me my drawdown. And then I can plug it into those numbers. Then this is another area. Now this tells us the types of wells, and it just so happens in the list where it says dug wells, bored, driven, jetted, most people have drilled wells. So that picture that I showed you of that driller, it was going to be a drilled well. But there are different types of drilled wells. And when I was thinking about exams, how they like to mess you up, I just thought it was interesting because on page 130, they have a California method of a drilled well. And those kind of things mess me up. So being that a drilled well is the most common, I would read this particular chapter. So there's different methods of how they actually drill a well. And then the next picture over is kind of nice too, because, you know, before you get to page 131, there's a picture about the different types of screens. So they never mention about a foot valve or, you know, it was surprising. They go right into, you have turbines, you have centrifugal force, all that good stuff. But the casing and then the screening protects the well itself. So that screening is going to be determined depending upon the type of soil you have in that aquifer, because the screens have to be a certain size that it doesn't allow the sand to go into it, but it has to allow the water to pass. But what'll happen with screening, and this is why people will camera their wells. Once again, water is the universal solvent. So depending upon the minerals that's in your water, and if you have a submersible pump, usually iron will foul a submersible pump because that's on the very bottom of the well. Or you'll start getting buildup of calcium deposits on the screen, and that's not going to allow water to be sucked into the well to be pumped up. So how we determine what type of screening is going to be based off of the sand. So there's some pretty good pictures in here. I liked it. And then if you go later, if you have time, in all of our Canvas assignments, sometimes I put the book number, which I apologize because it's my typing that you're relying on. So don't go by my book number, but I'll give you like questions in the assignment just to help you get through this book. Because that's where us operators, we get a little cocky because we have a well and we think when we sit for that test, it's going to be all about us. So I'm going to give you assignments to get you through this part. And these videos are going to help you too. I got good videos, my friends. Now,
I have a
go ahead.
question, Melissa, on the
Sure.
assignment. Do we fill them out and then PDF and then attach them? Because they're not a fillable PDF. So I printed mine, like for chapter 1, because I missed that lecture. And then do we fill out the spots that are open?
So basically, if we were doing a training class, this is what a handout that I would give people,
Okay.
but I'm not going to grade you. There are exams and quizzes that are going to be in the Canvas, and that's going to be a value to you. So those right there are just to help you navigate through that book.
Okay.
Now,
And then take the quizzes though for each chapter.
yes.
And
And
when are those due? Are they like due by next Tuesday for this week or?
I didn't put due dates on them because I'm not looking at this like a actual college class. It's just more for practice exams. But on the good side for y'all, and especially for Margaret, because if this is a oh goodness, what do you call it? It's funded through grants. Everybody's when you guys go through and do these practice quizzes, it'll show me how you're doing and if I need to cover something. But then also, Margaret, you'll be able to use those results for your reporting on your grants, so I can get that information. So Canvas is a little new for me, and I tried to figure out a way to put those PDF files in there that made them fillable. But if you have Adobe DC, you would be able to access typing. So do you guys, Adobe DC is a free program that you can download to your computer, and it's a PDF file. I'll put Adobe DC in the chat box. I try to make this in a way to keep you all engaged, but I also know that y'all work, and you know, I didn't want to suck too much time, but I want you to make creases in this book. So that's why you all have assignments, because most of the time it's been my experience that operators, they get these books and they never open them.
Yeah, it feels daunting to me. So I'm sure, you know, working full time for everybody else too. It's like we have to definitely set some time aside to work on it when you're not at work. So, and I don't know if people want to like get together to do some of that, or if your supervisors will let you work on it on Mondays or Fridays, because it'd be hard to wait till right before the test to do all these assignments. I
And
mean, I
then,
feel kind of overwhelmed just with week one, so I'm like, I got to get on it.
and you guys will be fine because you're all already in the field, you're professionals, and don't freak yourselves out with these exams. It's new terminologies, and that's what I'm here. I'm not to teach you about gate valves because you all know what gate valves are. It's the weird type of stuff. And then another thing that's in Canvas, sometimes we don't have time to do those the games like your Jeopardy and stuff, but they're embedded in Canvas. So if you're not a fun book reader, at least I have Kahoot in there, and I'm going to have Jeopardy in there, so you can challenge yourself and your teammates. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I believe
Yeah, I
it's,
have one. So
oh,
for the assignments and the quizzes, say we do them right, how do we get the, so we have it, how do we find out the right answers to see if we did, to see if we got the right answers?
I think it gives you the answer, like if it'll tell you if it's wrong or not.
When we, well, if the assignments aren't typable, how do we fill it
Oh
in?
no, the assignment part of it, it's more you'll find the information. Like I'm telling you to look for something in the
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
Yeah,
but how
you're
do we
not
know
gonna.
that we got it right for sure, you know, without really, obviously, yeah, we look in the book to find it, but how do we know for sure and we get the right answers so we can study that as well, make sure we do have all the right answers?
I could put,
Are we gonna go over it after we do the assignment, or I mean?
yeah, we can go over it, but what I'll do is then I'll upload that into Canvas. I would rather you guys making sure you're going through the book, because everything in that assignment is pulled directly out. So there's no wrong question. So if I'm asking you, what is the California method? You know, you're writing it down, and you writing it down helps you to remember it. I'm using psychology on y'all. So that's where that is. But the tests will show, I believe, right and wrong answers.
And
Those quizzes.
a lot of the right words are in blue, I think, too.
Yeah.
So it's not too hard to fill it in. The reading, like as you're reading, you fill in key things in the, and I printed it out, Andrew, so I'm gonna just keep them in a notebook.
All right. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, if I get stuck on anything, I'll ask all of you guys what you got. And I'm gonna try to catch up this weekend, so I'm not 6 chapters behind.
I'm gonna do some catching
Yeah.
up. I'll be at the beach this weekend.
And you know, when I did this with USET, gosh, I want to say it was like only 24 hours of class time that we had. So that was like a cramming. You guys are going to have 7 weeks of this. So you're going to do good. And I do this for, at least out west, we've been doing this for some time now. And I can say you're going to do good. There's
So
no reason why you shouldn't pass this.
if we do a little bit at a time, Melissa, the pass rates are higher.
Oh, heck yeah. Well, half of the time when I went to USET, y'all never even seen this book before. This was the first time they ever seen it. Same with the wastewater books. So you're already building a great foundations for yourself. So it's going to be good to go. You'll be good.
So I don't know if any of you guys want to get together on Monday. I could set up a Zoom call and we could go through some of the homeworks if you want together. If you guys want to do kind of a study hall together, we can. I don't know if you're interested though. I don't want to put another meeting on your calendar and it's hard to attend, you know.
And also in Canvas, you can, through discussions and stuff, you can email me. But what were you going to say, Andrew?
I was wondering what level license this is. Like, would it be like considered like a level like D or C? Like, do you know?
So, you know how in different states y'all have the difference? This is the lowest level. This is just in some states they refer to it as grade 1. Or that's the hard part. Florida, like their A could be the grade highest level. Massachusetts could be like a D.
Yeah.
So
I think
yeah.
it might be a level D for us, South Carolina.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you'll be good. And then they've changed these exams, I think, on to the better. So they're going to be written better and they're not going to be so tricky in terms of questions. And this will give you reciprocity, just having not only the training now that's going to be documented, and then also a lot of states recognize ABC. All right.
Hey, Melissa.
Yeah.
I had to jump off for a second, but did you talk about the tests and the quizzes that we're going to upload? That we've pulled some of those from that test bank to try to help strengthen and kind of prepare them for what those test questions are going to look like?
They were asking about the tests, Jack. I just have to make sure that they asked if they do the test, if it shows them what the right answer is. And that's the only thing that I got to make sure, or we got to make sure in Canvas it's set up so if they hit the wrong answer, it shows the right one. But as he meant,
grade them and then get back to us. And...
No, it's automatic.
Okay.
Yeah. We're looking for the answer keys to assignments as well.
And I can upload what I was looking for again, I kind of just did that to make sure. It's like studying. I like to study the Bible once in a while. So I got to know what chapter and what section. So those assignments, like I mentioned before, there's no wrong or right answer. It's just making sure you know what's
Key.
this in that book. Yeah, the key meat of this book.
So then what I was going to do was fill that out and then try to take the test for each chapter, and then hopefully I can pass that chapter test. And if I do well on that, does that help me know that I'm getting ready for the CERT exam?
Yeah, because look, these are, see that ABC right there?
Yeah.
That's why I'm using this book and not the Sacramento manuals, because it got a little ugly for a while there when ABC endorsed AWWA. Now, you guys, I started coming out of high school, so I'm working backwards in terms of education, and I'm a certified operator, and I've taken different exams in other states as well. And I can tell you, this is a good book. You study this, you're going to be good. You just got to study. And I'm pretty sure when we did the USET conference, the folks in my class, they did good, but we were at a conference and oh my gosh, if we wouldn't have had fun, look what happened. We got COVID right after it. So
yeah, we'll take our classes remotely and leave it to the new guys to take them at the conference, right?
And hey, Melissa, I don't know if you mentioned it, but you know, at the end of each chapter, there are study questions.
yeah, they mentioned that. And
Now,
not only,
but you know, the answers are in the back. And I hate that because it's so tempting when you're trying to take, you know, questions to just not look at the answer. But you know, you really should try to those study questions without looking at the answer, and then look at the answer and go back and study those questions that you're missing. There's also, I don't know if you mentioned it, Melissa, but AWWA has a test bank out there that you can buy if you go to their website, and it's $19 and I think 95 cents for water treatment one, and it's all sorted, and you can filter it by the need to know criteria. And so in prepping for this class, that's what I did, and I'm not a member of AWWA, and so I still paid the $19 or whatever. You can load it as an app on your cell phone, and when you're sitting somewhere and you've got 5 or 10 minutes to kill, you can sit there and open that test bank and just answer questions, and it'll tell you right then if you got it right or wrong.
okay.
And as you get, huh?
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. I'm just going to tell you all one thing. And I was in upper management for the city of Phoenix, and we trained a lot of people. And it's not so much of practice exams. You got to have a foundation. And that's what I'm going to train you on, because I can say the word coagulant and you could take a test and memorize it, but you got to have that base information, and you're going to have that by the time you're done with this class. And then you can do these practice type exams, but you got to start off with the foundation first.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and we'll be using what Jack's talking about, because I'm pulling some of those questions out of those banks and putting them into those assignments. So you guys, it'll be good. Don't be scared.
Okay.
Can
I
we
got
get the
my
website to that, if possible?
for AWWA.
To the bank, so we can possibly take those tests later on.
So you have to buy it.
Yeah.
But I'm putting those banks or those questions also in the assignments as well. So it's awwa.org. And then when you go there, you'll go to the operator site, and then you can download it in not Google. What is it? Android, you have Apple Store, And then, I mean, no, Apple, you have Apple Store. Android, it's, I forgot what.
Android.
Yeah. And then if you click in and search for AWWA, you'll find them. And then as Jack mentioned, they are in increments. So you can purchase a set dealing with just water treatment or distribution and what have you. But I want you guys to relax. I mean, I've trained a lot of people all over the place, and some of those people couldn't even speak English. So you pay attention, you be here, and you'll be good.
Thanks,
All
Melissa.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have a good weekend.
Yay!
You as well.
Thanks for
All right,
attending.
see y'all Tuesday.